You know, people always say family is supposed to be your safe place, the one bond that can never truly break. But let me tell you something, that's a lie. Blood can betray you faster than any stranger ever could. And I learned that the hard way, the moment my own daughter-in-law looked me in the eyes and told me I was no longer welcome to see my only grandchild. That day, something inside me cracked. And what I did next? Well, let's just say no one in my family saw it coming. My name is Eleanor. I'm 72 years old, a retired literature professor, and until recently, a woman who believed she had built a life worth passing down to her family. I spent decades saving, investing, and creating an estate that could keep my children and grandchildren secure long after I was gone. My late husband, Henry, and I worked our entire lives for that. It wasn't just money, it was the blood, sweat, and tears of 2 lifetimes, carefully preserved so the next generation wouldn't have to struggle the way we did. For most of my life, I thought I was blessed. I had one son, Michael, my pride and joy. He was a quiet, thoughtful boy growing up, always reading, always gentle. He grew into a strong man, a lawyer who seemed to carry both his father's sense of justice and my love for books. When he married Anna, I thought my prayers had been answered. She was beautiful, charming, and at first, so respectful toward me. She used to call me Mom, bake cookies in my kitchen, and tell me how much she appreciated everything I did for them. I believed her. And when their first child was born, my granddaughter, Lily, my entire world lit up again. I remember holding that tiny baby in my arms, smelling her soft hair, and thinking, this is my second chance at life. This is what it means to live forever. The early years were pure joy. I babysat Lily almost every weekend. We read together, played in the garden, baked messy cookies that Anna would later scold me for letting her eat too much of. But I didn't care. That little girl clung to me, called me Nana, and giggled whenever I tickled her toes. She became the light in my twilight years. But looking back now, I should have seen the cracks forming in the pretty picture. Anna wasn't the sweet, grateful daughter-in-law she pretended to be. No, there were subtle moments, quiet daggers hidden inside her polite words. I remember once, at Lily's 3rd birthday party, Anna leaned close to me, smiling for the guests, and whispered, "Try not to give her too much candy, Eleanor. You wouldn't want her to have bad teeth like you, would you?" She laughed as if it was a joke, but the sting was sharp, cruel. Michael didn't hear it. No one did. I swallowed my pride and smiled, pretending it didn't bother me. Another time, she accidentally left me off the list for Lily's preschool recital. When I asked about it later, she brushed it off. "Oh, I must have forgotten to forward the email. You know how scatterbrained I can be." But the smirk in her eyes told me it wasn't forgetfulness, it was control. She wanted to dictate how much of Lily's life I could be a part of. Still, I ignored the warning signs. Why? Because I loved my son. Because I adored my granddaughter. And because, foolishly, I believed that family ties, especially those forged by marriage and blood, were unbreakable. Life carried on like that for a while. I kept myself busy in retirement, teaching a few private students, gardening, volunteering at the library. Every Friday, Michael would drop Lily off at my house. She'd run into my arms, her tiny backpack bouncing behind her, and we'd spend the whole day making crafts or feeding the ducks at the park. Those were the happiest hours of my week. And then, like a storm you don't see coming until it's already tearing the roof off your house, it all changed. It started small, with Anna making excuses. "Lily's too busy this weekend. She has a birthday party. We're trying to keep her on a routine." Weeks began to stretch between visits. My calls went unanswered. My texts left on read. The house, once filled with Lily's laughter, grew silent and cold. At first, I told myself it was just life. Kids grow, schedules change. But deep down, something darker gnawed at me. Anna wasn't just limiting visits. She was shutting me out, deliberately, maliciously. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, she wanted me erased from Lily's life completely. The breaking point came one rainy Sunday afternoon. I had shown up at their house unannounced, holding a basket of Lily's favorite cookies, just hoping to see her smile. Anna opened the door, her expression as sharp as broken glass. "What are you doing here?" she asked flatly. I just wanted to see Lily," I stammered. "I brought her some cookies." Anna didn't even glance at the basket. She stood firm in the doorway, blocking me from entering. Her voice was calm, too calm, like a blade sliding into the flesh without resistance. "Eleanor," she said, "it's time you understood. You're not part of Lily's life anymore. We don't need you confusing her, spoiling her, or interfering with how Michael and I are raising her. So please, stop showing up. And don't expect to see her again." She closed the door. Just like that. I stood there, rain soaking my coat, the cookies slipping from my trembling hands, and for the first time in my 72 years, I felt truly powerless. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed like a coffin lid sealing. My granddaughter, the very reason I still woke up every morning, was being stolen from me. And that, my dear listener, was the moment something inside me snapped. Anna thought she could erase me. She thought she could strip me of my family, my legacy, my worth. But what she didn't know was this: I had spent a lifetime building power. And while she may have shut me out of Lily's world, I held the keys to something far greater. The estate. Every dollar, every property, every investment, everything she and Michael thought would one day be theirs. And in that moment, dripping wet on their doorstep, I made a silent vow. If Anna wanted war, then war was exactly what she would get. Do you know what it feels like to be erased? Not to die, not to disappear physically, but to be treated as if you never existed, by your own family. That was the cruelty Anna gifted me after that rainy afternoon when she slammed the door in my face. For days, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My hands shook whenever the phone rang, hoping, praying it was Michael, or even little Lily calling me from his phone. But the silence was absolute. My son, my only child, didn't reach out, didn't ask why his mother hadn't been around. It was as if Anna had whispered poison into his ear, and he believed every word. Still, I tried to be patient. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe if I gave it time, Anna would come to her senses. After all, hadn't I welcomed her into this family? Hadn't I stood by her side when her own parents refused to help with their wedding expenses? I even sold one of my late husband's antique collections to pay for their honeymoon. Surely, she couldn't forget that. But Anna wasn't the type to remember kindness. She thrived on control. And now that she had a taste of it, she wasn't letting go. The first warning sign came a week later. I went to the library to return some books, and one of the volunteers, a friend of Michael's, pulled me aside. "Eleanor," she said gently, "I didn't want to upset you, but Michael and Anna brought Lily in for story time yesterday." I asked where you were, and Anna just laughed. She said, "Oh, Eleanor's too old to handle a toddler. We don't need her help anymore." Too old. Those two words burned hotter than fire. Me? Too old? The same woman who raised a son, worked 30 years as a professor, managed a household, and still walked 2 miles every morning? My jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. But it didn't stop there. The next time I saw Michael, briefly, outside the courthouse where he worked, he barely looked me in the eye. He hugged me quickly, distracted, and said, "Mom, I really think you should give Anna some space. She says you're overwhelming. Maybe just back off for a while." Overwhelming. That's what she called me now. A burden. An inconvenience. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand he remember the truth. But instead, I bit my tongue. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We swallow our pain, hoping our children will one day see the light. But Anna's shadow only grew darker. Soon, the invitations stopped coming altogether. Birthdays, school plays, holiday dinners, I was cut out of everything. One Christmas, I sat alone in my decorated living room, staring at the empty stockings I had knitted myself, the ones meant for Lily. I imagined her opening presents under Anna's carefully curated tree, while my gifts sat untouched in a box by the door. Then, whispers started trickling back to me, from neighbors, from church friends, even from the cashier at the grocery store. Anna says you've been meddling too much. She told people you criticize her parenting. She said you're trying to turn Lily against her own mother. Lies. All of it. But lies, when repeated often enough, start to sound like truth. And Anna knew exactly how to weave her web. What hurt the most wasn't her venom, it was Michael's silence. He didn't defend me. He didn't question her. He let her smear my name, reduce me to a caricature of a bitter old woman. My own son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of love in my body, was slipping through my fingers. And yet, the cruelest dagger was still to come. One afternoon, desperate for a glimpse of Lily, I drove to her preschool. I waited outside the fence like some stranger, clutching a scarf I had knitted for her. When the children came running out, laughing and shouting, I spotted her instantly, her curly hair bouncing, her smile radiant. My heart soared. But before I could call out, Anna appeared. She took Lily's hand, glanced in my direction, and froze. For a split second, our eyes locked. I thought, hoped, maybe she'd soften. Maybe she'd let Lily run to me, just for a hug. Instead, she pulled Lily closer and hissed something I couldn't hear. My granddaughter turned, her face confused, and then she looked away. As if I wasn't even there. As if Anna had already taught her that Nana was someone to ignore. That moment shattered me. Not just the loss of a visit, but the loss of recognition. To be erased from a child's heart, to be painted as a ghost in her story, that is a cruelty no grandmother should ever endure. I drove home in silence that night, my chest heavy with grief. But grief slowly curdled into something else. Something sharper. Rage. Because here's the truth Anna didn't know, for every nasty word she whispered, for every lie she spun, for every door she slammed in my face, I kept notes. I remembered. And though I remained silent, inside me grew a list of every cruelty, every insult, every attempt to erase me. And as the days turned into weeks, one thought began to bloom in my mind, dark and intoxicating: why should my life's work, my estate, my inheritance, fall into the hands of the woman trying to destroy me? Why should she ever think she'd won? Anna might have stolen my granddaughter's time, but she would never touch the empire I had built with my bare hands. And for the first time, I began to wonder, not if I should fight back, but how. They say betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those you once called family. And oh, how true that is. By the time winter rolled around, Anna had successfully painted me as a villain in my own son's story. I had already been locked out of birthdays, school plays, and Sunday dinners. My heart was bruised, my spirit weary, but I still clung to hope that maybe Michael would see through her lies. That maybe Lily would one day ask, "Where's Nana?" and force Anna to face the truth. But instead, what came next wasn't a reunion. It was annihilation. It started with a phone call from my attorney. "Eleanor," he said cautiously, "I received a strange request this morning. Your son called, asking about the details of your will. Specifically, he wanted to know if everything was still being left to him and Anna. Did you authorize that conversation?" My blood turned to ice. "No," I whispered. "I did not." That was the first crack. But the real earthquake came a week later, At a family meeting, Anna insisted on hosting at their home. She called it a discussion about the future. I was curious, naive enough to think maybe, just maybe, she was finally opening the door again. I should have known better. When I arrived, Anna greeted me with her usual fake smile, Michael standing stiffly by her side. They led me to the dining room, where papers were neatly stacked on the table. Legal documents. Contracts. I felt my stomach twist. "Eleanor," Anna began sweetly, "we've been thinking about your health. You're 72 now, and it's important to plan ahead responsibly. Don't you agree?" I narrowed my eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting?" She slid the papers toward me. "A transfer of property. If you sign these, Michael and I can manage your estate for you. It'll be easier on everyone in the long run. That way, you don't have to worry about anything. We'll take care of it all." Take care of it all. The words dripped like venom. I glanced at Michael, searching for some sign of hesitation, some flicker of loyalty. But his face was unreadable, his jaw tight. "You want me," I said slowly, "to sign over everything I've worked for, while I'm still alive?" Anna's smile widened, sharp as a knife. "It's what families do, Eleanor. We take care of each other." My hands trembled. Not from weakness, but from fury. This wasn't about care. This was about control. About erasing me not just from Lily's life, but from my legacy. I pushed the papers back across the table. "No." The air turned cold. Anna's expression hardened, her mask slipping just enough for me to see the contempt beneath. "Think carefully," she hissed. "Do you really want to make things difficult at your age? Do you want to cause stress for Michael? For Lily?" Her words cut deeper than any knife. She wasn't just threatening me, she was weaponizing the very people I loved most. I stood up, my voice shaking but firm. "I will never sign away my life's work. Not to you." Michael looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes broke me more than Anna's cruelty ever could. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He was resigned. As if he'd already chosen his side. As if I no longer mattered. That night, I cried harder than I had in decades. I cried for my lost son, for my stolen granddaughter, for the cruel twist of fate that left me surrounded by family but utterly alone. But the nightmare wasn't over. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the bank. My joint savings account, the one Michael had access to for emergencies, had been drained. Tens of thousands of dollars, gone. Transferred directly into an account under Anna's name. I rushed to confront Michael, my heart pounding. He met me in the driveway, his face pale. "Mom, listen," he stammered. "Anna said it was for Lily's future. College, medical bills. You don't need the money right now." "Not right now." My voice cracked like thunder. "That's my life's work, Michael. Your father's sweat, my sacrifices, gone." But he didn't apologize. He didn't fight for me. He just lowered his head and whispered, "Anna thought it was best. Anna thought it was best." And just like that, I realized the cruel truth. I had lost him. My son was no longer mine. He belonged to her now. The betrayal crushed me. For days, I wandered my house like a ghost, staring at the photographs on the walls. Michael's childhood smile. Henry's proud eyes. Lily's little drawings pinned to the fridge. All of it mocked me now, remnants of a family that no longer existed. I could feel myself breaking, piece by piece. But even in the pit of despair, life has a way of slipping in tiny slivers of light. One night, desperate for distraction, I sat at my desk to review old documents. That's when I noticed something odd. Among the paperwork Anna had shoved at me during that family meeting, there was a draft copy, one she must have left by mistake. Scribbled notes in her handwriting littered the margins. "Redirect funds here. Convince Michael she's incompetent. Accelerate transition before summer. My breath caught in my throat. Proof. Not just suspicion. Cold, undeniable evidence of her intentions. She wasn't just manipulative, she was calculated, strategic, ruthless. And she had left behind the blueprint of her own scheme. As I held that paper in my hands, something inside me shifted. The grief didn't vanish, but it hardened into resolve. If Anna thought she had destroyed me, she was wrong. She had underestimated the very woman who had survived widowhood, built an estate from nothing, and raised a son single-handedly. She thought she had me cornered. But she had just handed me the first piece of the weapon I would use to bring her down. When I returned home that evening, the air in my house felt different. What used to be a sanctuary filled with memories of laughter, family dinners, and quiet afternoons with my grandchild now seemed hollow. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible, not just because my daughter-in-law had banned me from seeing my only grandchild, but because my son had remained silent. His silence told me everything. He had chosen his wife's wishes over his mother's heart. I spent that night pacing through the hallways, staring at old photographs hung along the walls. There was my son as a boy, missing teeth, holding up a baseball trophy. There he was on his graduation day, and later, standing at the altar on his wedding. Each picture whispered of sacrifices I had made, sacrifices they now so easily dismissed. My estate, the wealth I had worked tirelessly to build over decades, was intended to secure their future. But as I clutched the original copy of my will, a sharp clarity overcame me. Why should they inherit what they had already cast aside? The following morning, I scheduled an urgent appointment with my attorney. He had handled my estate planning for years, so he was startled by the sudden request. When I explained the situation, my daughter-in-law's banishment and my son's silence, he leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said, "Are you certain you want to take such a drastic step? Once it's amended, there's no going back." "I am certain," I replied, my voice steady. "If they cannot respect me while I'm alive, they will not profit from me when I'm gone." The process was swift. A few signatures, a few destroyed pages, and decades of promises were erased in less than an hour. I redirected my estate toward charities close to my heart, as well as a trust for education programs that would give opportunities to children who truly needed them. Children who, unlike my own grandchild, would never know my name but would one day benefit from my legacy. It was a painful decision, but it also felt like liberation. News of the new will traveled faster than I expected. My son called me 2 weeks later, his voice shaking. "Mom, what's this I hear about you cutting us out of the will?" I paused before answering. "It's true. I tore it up. You and your wife made your choice when you decided I wasn't fit to see my grandchild. Choices have consequences." There was a silence so long I thought he had hung up. Then, finally, he said, "You can't be serious. That estate, it's supposed to stay in the family." The family. I let out a bitter laugh. Family isn't just about blood, son. It's about respect, love, and loyalty. If I don't have those, what meaning does leaving my estate to you have? For the first time, I sensed panic in his voice. He tried to negotiate, tried to backtrack, even tried to place the blame solely on his wife. But I had heard enough. "You stood by and let her do this. That silence was your answer." And I ended the call, but my revenge wasn't just about removing them from the will. I had been meticulous in documenting every interaction, every message, every email that proved how I had been pushed out of my grandchild's life. I handed the evidence to a family mediator, ensuring that if they ever attempted to challenge the new will in court, their cruelty would be on full display. The law might side with written documents, but public opinion often sided with truth. And the truth was that they had shut me out, treated me as though I were disposable. Months passed. Invitations to family gatherings stopped arriving. Photos of my grandchild were never sent. On social media, I saw glimpses of birthdays and milestones I wasn't invited to share. Each post was a dagger, but each dagger hardened my resolve. They believed they had hurt me by excluding me from their lives, but in reality, they had freed me. No longer was I tethered by the hope that they might change. Instead, I channeled my energy into the charitable causes I had chosen. I visited schools, met children whose eyes lit up at the promise of opportunity, and felt a sense of fulfillment I hadn't experienced in years. My attorney, amused at my transformation, once joked, "You've turned revenge into philanthropy." And perhaps he was right. What better revenge than to deny my ungrateful family the fortune they had been counting on and instead give it to those who would appreciate it? But fate has a way of circling back. One day, there was a knock at my door. Standing there was my son, looking worn and desperate. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mom, I'm sorry. We need your help. Things aren't going well, financially. The business. It's struggling. And Emily, she regrets how things turned out. Please, can we talk?" I stared at him, my heart torn between the instinct to comfort my child and the hard-earned wisdom of betrayal. "You only came back because you need money," I said quietly. "Not because you want to mend our relationship. If my estate hadn't changed hands, you wouldn't be here." His face reddened with shame, and for the first time, he couldn't meet my eyes. That moment told me everything. I closed the door gently, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Revenge, I realized, doesn't always roar in grand gestures. Sometimes it's quiet, like the silence that follows when someone realizes they've lost everything they took for granted. My son and his wife had gambled on my love being unconditional. They thought they could take, and I would keep giving. But I finally showed them that my love had limits, and those limits were crossed the moment they ripped my grandchild away from me. The will was torn, the estate redirected, the legacy rewritten. And as I sat in my garden, surrounded by the peace of my own company, I felt a strange sense of justice. They had wanted control, but in the end, I had the final word. My life's work would not be squandered on those who disrespected me. Instead, it would live on through the lives of children who would never call me grandma but who might one day thank me in their own way. That was enough. And perhaps, in that quiet victory, I found the truest form of revenge. The days following my decision were both liberating and haunting. For the first time in years, I felt as though I had reclaimed a piece of my dignity. The will that once represented years of sacrifice and loyalty was nothing more than shredded paper now, resting in the bottom of a trash bin. My daughter-in-law's smug assumption that she would inherit everything had been shattered. Yet, the silence in my home that night was heavy. I stared at the framed photo of my late husband and whispered, "I did what was right, didn't I?" The truth is, I wasn't sure. Anger had guided my hand, but after the rage faded, the ache of loss returned. I didn't just want revenge, I wanted my son and my grandchild in my life. But the choice my daughter-in-law had made, cutting me out so cruelly, wasn't something I could ignore. A week later, word spread through the family grapevine. My sister called, her voice trembling with disbelief. You actually tore it up?" she asked. I could almost see her shaking her head on the other end of the line. "Do you know what kind of storm this is going to create?" I did. And that storm arrived sooner than expected. My son showed up at my door, his face a mixture of frustration and desperation. "Mom, what have you done?" he demanded, his voice breaking. He wasn't angry in the way his wife often was, cold, sharp, cutting. No, he was pained, conflicted. "I did what I had to," I replied firmly, though inside I was trembling. "She barred me from my grandchild, my own flesh and blood. Do you think your father would have wanted me to stay silent, to hand over everything to someone who has no respect for me?" He slumped onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. "You've made things worse. She's furious, Mom. She says you're unstable, that this proves it. The word unstable pierced me like a knife. For years I had been the one who held this family together after my husband passed, the one who paid off debts, who helped with their down payment, who babysat at a moment's notice. Now I was being painted as irrational, all because I dared to stand up for myself. But even as my son pleaded, something inside me had shifted. I realized how much control my daughter-in-law had seized, not just over him, but over my own identity. For too long, I had been defined by my generosity, my willingness to bend, to give, to sacrifice. And what had it brought me? Exclusion. Disrespect. Loneliness. The days turned into weeks. My son visited less frequently, torn between his loyalty to me and his obligations to his wife. The silence from my grandchild's world became deafening. Birthdays passed without invitations. Holidays were celebrated without me. I sat at the dining table, staring at the empty chairs where laughter used to echo, and I wondered if I had doomed myself to isolation. And yet, something unexpected happened. The more time I spent away from their drama, the more I began to see myself again, not just as a mother or a grandmother, but as a woman who still had choices. I reconnected with old friends. I joined a community group at the library. I began traveling to places I had put off for years, always waiting for someday. For the first time since my husband's passing, I was living for myself. The estate, once the central symbol of family legacy, transformed in my mind. It was no longer a bribe for affection, no longer a tether binding me to people who didn't value me. Instead, it became a tool of freedom. I rewrote my will, this time with intention. I designated funds to charities, to scholarships in my husband's name, to causes that would carry our legacy further than greed or entitlement ever could. The rest, I left to people who had stood by me, not because they shared my blood, but because they showed me kindness. When word of this reached my son and his wife, the reaction was explosive. She called me, venom dripping from every syllable. How dare you? After everything we've done, after all we've included you in. I cut her off, my voice steadier than I expected. You didn't include me. You used me. There's a difference. There was silence on the line, then the sharp click of disconnection. For once, I didn't feel shaken. I felt free. The real awakening, though, came one rainy afternoon months later. My doorbell rang, and when I opened it, my son stood there with tears streaming down his face. He looked exhausted, beaten down, not by me, but by the life he had allowed himself to be trapped in. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I miss you. I miss the way things used to be." In that moment, the hardened anger I had carried cracked, replaced by something softer, pity, sorrow, and love. I pulled him into an embrace, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had my son back. He admitted the truth I had long suspected: his marriage was suffocating, his wife's control unbearable. He had been afraid to lose his family, afraid to lose his child, but in trying to hold it all together, he had lost me instead. That night we talked for hours. About his father. About the mistakes we both made. About the hope that, one day, my grandchild might understand the love I had always carried, even from a distance. The consequences of my decision were undeniable. I lost years with my grandchild, I fractured my relationship with my son, and I endured nights of aching loneliness. But the awakening was just as powerful. I learned that love without respect is not love at all, it is servitude. I learned that legacies are not built on money or wills, but on dignity, courage, and the truth we leave behind. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that sometimes, the only way to reclaim yourself is to risk losing the very people who take you for granted. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe my daughter-in-law will never forgive me. Maybe my grandchild will grow up hearing only one side of the story. But I do know this: when I leave this world, I will leave it on my terms, with my head held high, and with a legacy that speaks not of bitterness, but of strength. Because tearing up that will wasn't just an act of revenge, it was the first step toward remembering who I was all along.